Good Morning, Miss Tolliver, tonight at 10:30 on CPTV.
Film or fact? In Jurassic Park, scientists bring dinosaurs back from extinction by taking DNA from ancient mosquitoes. But could this really happen? See why the future may be closer than you think as we unravel the secret of life.
Series starts Sunday, September 26th at 9.
One of America's foremost journalists is coming to town. Join National Public Radio's legal correspondent, Nina Totenberg, for a fascinating evening of stories and insights. Ms. Totenberg gained national attention for breaking the stories on Supreme Court nominees Douglas Ginsburg and Clarence Thomas. She's the recipient of many awards for excellence in journalism, including the Alfred I. DuPont Columbia University's Silver Baton. An evening with Nina Totenberg presented by Connecticut Public Radio. Call for tickets and information.
Specials on CPTV are made possible in part by member support and
Derby Savings Bank, introducing their new one-year adjustable rate mortgage. Derby Savings is proud to underwrite CPTV's new 6-part landmark series, A Connecticut Town Meeting.
The following is a CPTV original.
Hi, I'm Tom Garrity. Welcome to Connecticut Town Meeting, a series of shows on the toughest issues facing our state. Tonight, we're going to tackle one of the toughest of them all, the segregation of our public schools. The governor of Connecticut and our legislature have come up with a plan for us to do something about that segregation. Here we have gathered experts and citizens to discuss that plan and what it will mean for us and for our children. Among our guests is Commissioner of Education Vincent Ferrandino. Commissioner Ferrandino, what is the plan all about and what does it mean for us?
Tom, the legislation calls for a two-step planning process. The process is focused on developing an approach to reduce racial isolation, to enhance diversity in our schools, and to improve the quality of education in our public schools. The process includes a local planning process, a group advisory to the local Board of Education, made up of a broad base of citizens, and then a second phase, which is a regional process. 11 regions have been designated around the state for the purposes of developing plans that will focus on those themes. There are some incentives that have been put into the legislation to encourage certain types of arrangements to evolve, but the issue is wide open, and the notion is that the citizenry ought to engage in this discussion and ought to come up with solutions to a problem I think that we all recognize as being one that's critical to the state.
Professor John Britton from the University of Connecticut Law School, you've represented a group of plaintiffs who've sued the state over the segregation of the schools. How does this plan look to you?
27 years ago, the Commissioner of Education said that experimentation with desegregation should, quote, be provided through the local leadership, school boards, rather than by state or federal mandate, unquote. The state's effort at desegregation throughout all of these years on the local level has failed miserably, and it has ever since, and there's no reason to believe that the legislature's latest lip service will produce any greater signs of success.
Barbara Toman, you're a PTA member out in Trumbull. What do you think of the plan?
I find that it is giving citizens a chance to work together locally to recognize a problem that has existed, and I hope people are taking it seriously. I think because the legislature has put the time and effort into a plan that more people are taking it seriously and taking a good look at what is happening in their community.
Last week, we went out into the Capitol and its suburbs to ask ordinary citizens in the street what they thought this meant for them in the future of Connecticut. Let's look at the clips of what they had to say and then come back to the discussion here in the studio. What do you think of the governor's plan to make the schools regional, so all the school districts would be mixed up a little bit?
I think it could be good in some ways and bad in some ways. Maybe a lot of kids don't want to leave their neighborhoods, or maybe it'll make, if there's one school that's going to be real bad and you're spreading them out, maybe that make a whole lot of schools bad.
Was it something wrong with the West Hartford schools, or was something right about your private school?
There was nothing wrong about the West Hartford schools. Just the private school was more appealing to me as an individual.
And what appealed to you there?
Well, the time that the teachers spend with the kids and the individualized support, I don't think you get that at public schools.
Do you think a private school can give an integrated experience in terms of social and race relations and so on?
I think they try, but it's tough because we have a segregated society.
How would you feel about going far out into the suburbs to go to school? Would you like it?
Fine, yeah.
Would you mind a big bus ride?
Yep. Me too.
You'd like a bus ride?
Yeah.
Would you be scared the suburban kids would be mean or no?
Yeah. Yeah.
You'd be scared?
Yeah.
But would you do it anyway?
Yeah.
All righty. How about if kids came in from the suburbs to go to your school? Would you like that, or would you think that was a
yeah.
bad?
Yeah, I could be my friend.
Yeah.
That could be my best friend.
What do you think of the public schools and their problem?
I don't really. I think it's not like it's not a very good place to be right now. Like Hartford High and places like that. Because I've been to Hartford High and it's like messed up.
What's messed up about it?
It's like the bathrooms, people piss on the floor and things like that. It's just messed up. Like the windows are broken.
You don't think that bringing city and suburban schools together would help, as I understand you?
It's going to be tough because going from one place to another with the children, they need a period of adjustment, and it takes time. When kids are in Burns School from 2nd to 6th or to 7th or 8th grade together, and they get changed to another place and other people coming in, it's going to be a conflict all the time.
Would you like to see it as a purely funding matter, or would you like to see really much more integrated city and suburban schools?
I may be in a minority, but I'd like to see more integration, because I think that kids growing up in the suburbs are not growing up with an idea of what the real world is all about either.
Putting a round peg in a square hole. What you're trying to do, you're saying, well, these kids are brought up in an underdeveloped place, they're brought up where they're underprivileged, let's put them someplace affluent in the suburbs, and maybe by leading by example, they're going to turn around and see by example that things can be better. But you're taking something that the culture is totally different, their background's totally different, you're trying to change them. And from past experiences, it's not going to happen 100% of the time. It may happen 10% of the time or 5% of the time, but the majority of the time it's not going to work.
The last guy you heard on that tape was pretty skeptical. He talked about a round peg in a square hole. What's your reaction to all that?
You know, it's hard for me. I'm a commissioner on the Board of Education in the city of Waterbury. The city of Waterbury, being fluctuating between the 4th and 5th largest city in the state, has a 52 to 54% minority population in its school system. I believe that that urban school district right now is the model that the state is looking for. But it's also difficult being in the position of thinking that in order for us to regionalize with the suburban towns around us, that it's actually our minority population that would be impacted. And so sometimes I think that now we're going back to where we began, and is that the way that we should be going?
Paul Knierim, you live pretty far out in the suburbs relative to the inner city. What's your reaction as a state legislator to the plan you've got before you?
Well, my concern with the plan and my reason for voting against it in the legislature this past session is that I think it's focused on the wrong goal. I think we clearly see that the schools in Connecticut are of unequal quality, and we ought to address that. The Sheff versus O'Neill lawsuit has demonstrated the profoundly substandard conditions in some of the city schools. We ought to put our focus on improving the quality of all schools and making sure that all students have equal access to quality, rather than putting the focus on race, because I don't think that's the real issue.
Now we have the Sheffs with us, Elizabeth and Milo. What's your reaction to the legislation's plan? What do you think Connecticut needs?
I would like to respond to your point about quality, because I believe that quality includes an integrated, diverse setting, not only in the classroom and teaching staff, but in a curriculum. And I wonder if the plan to plan is another plan to plan, as we've always done in Connecticut, or are we going to really do some things around the issue of quality education, which for me includes diversity? Where's the teaching staff coming in? Where's the curriculum changes? Where are the methodologies going to change? I think there's a lot of things that have to be addressed that I don't see any measurable goals in this planning process. I want to know You know, when we started this Action Mile, I was in the 4th grade. He's entering the 9th grade. He'll be out of school before I see any changes, and that's all right. We planned it like that. But I want to know where the gumption comes in. Where's the chutzpah in this planning process? Where are the changes really going to be measured?
Kevin Sullivan, you're a state senator, and I think you were pretty important in the creation of this planning process. What's your response to Ms. Horton-Sheff and her son Milo?
I think that we've learned some lessons, and the lessons are reflected in the legislation. We've had the opportunity to see what doesn't work in this country. What doesn't work is top-down forced solutions. What does work is trusting people. This bill is about trusting people, and I'm not willing to throw out that process and that trust until we've given them the opportunity. I believe there are people of goodwill in city, suburb, and small town who are going to commit themselves to this process, and this is the only way we're going to deal with this issue. It's not going to be dictated in Hartford.
How does it look to people from, say, Greenwich? We have a couple of you from Greenwich here. What do you two think of this plan and what it amounts to?
Well, I'm a state rep from Greenwich, and I also voted against this, both in the Education Committee and on the floor of the House, because fundamentally, the people who are most affected by this plan never get a say, the parents and the children. You're required to have one public hearing. That doesn't give them adequate input.
So you're worried you're going to be forced into a plan you're not going to like. Is that right?
I represent that opinion in my district, yes.
Susie Lafitte, what do you think, looking at it from the inner city in Bridgeport?
Well, I feel that this process is long overdue. I feel we needed a program like this, or the beginning of something like this, for a long, long time. I believe in a complete approach to education, which does not include isolation. I believe this gives us an opportunity to be creative in our educational approach and to reshape our schools if necessary.
Now that's a pretty moderate statement from an inner city point of view. I've got some neighbors, Jackie Durrell, right, from Fairfield. What do you think of it, looking at it? You're next door to Bridgeport. Do you want to pitch in and help and come up with some regional solutions, or are you reacting a little more hesitantly to this plan?
You probably got the wrong first selectman. I agree with her completely. I think if we don't educate the people, the young people in the inner cities, we're all going to pay the price in future ways. I also agree with what Kevin said, though. You can't force it on people. You've got to start at the bottom and work up. Good leadership and working with your people, you have to convince them that everybody, although we're not born equal, despite what Abraham Lincoln and other people said, everybody in this country should have a chance at a good education, and we've got to help our inner city children.
So that's your advice to Greenwich?
That's my advice, yes.
To Greenwich. Okay. Let me go back to another of the fashioners of this plan, Nancy Wyman. Nancy, what do you say to constituents out there who are really worried that this plan is going to take away their say, something that Paul has said?
I disagree with the people that are saying that. I of course, agree with my co-chairman that the reason that we've done it this way is to hand the process to the people that know. And the parents have a lot to be able to say in this matter. By having it at the local advisory committee, how your local boards of education comprise this local advisory committee, the fact that we have an advisory committee also at the regional level will open up the process. It doesn't say that they have to only have one public hearing. The local elected officials, those people that have to answer directly to their constituents, the parents, the teachers, and the children, are the ones that are going to be voting to accept or reject the plan. And I think their input, and as we know as elected officials, the closer you get to the people, the more the people have the input to your elected officials. And I think this is the only way we can go. When we hear Dr. Britton talking about a process similar to this years and years ago, we've already seen what's happened in Boston. And when things were actually forced, it didn't work. And at least this way, we're trying to have people sit down and talk about it.
What I hear you saying, and I want John to respond to this for all of us, is that what we see on the one hand is an overly coercive process that fails because it pushes too hard and pushes citizens in a way that they simply resist or opt out. They go to private schools, they drop out, and so on and so forth. On the other hand, we have a comment, gee, it's taken a heck of a long time. John started out with a statement saying that there was a plan somewhat similar to this years and years ago. John, what's your reflection on this?
Well, my reflection, Tom, is that the deck is stacked. For an example, the planning process consists of these regional forums. 85% of them are the chief elected official, the select person or the mayor, or the president of the Board of Education. In an average district, say, of 40 districts, you have 20 school districts, you have 40 people who are heads of the local government and head of the Board of Education. You have 6 teachers, that's 46, plus some parents for about 48. But 40 of those 48 people are your chief elected officials. They nominate a plan. If that plan manages to come out looking halfway decent, it must be passed by both a majority of the boards of education and of the city governments in the region. And if it manages to escape that, no district is required to participate, even if the majority of the districts in the region approve it.
Now, you're saying there are no teeth in this plan, essentially,
Absolutely.
right, John? But then you look over at an experience like Boston, where the statisticians will tell us that the city schools are more segregated now than when Judge Garrity, no relation, started the effort. What's your reaction to that, that too much coercion can...
My reaction is you need a mixture of both some mandatory approach as well as some voluntary means. And this approach here leaves it all in the hands of those who have the least to gain from desegregation, namely the mayors and first select persons and the presidents of the Board of Education.
It's too political. It's too trusting in process. Is
Absolutely.
that what you're saying? Let me hear from some teachers or some students in the audience. What's your reaction to this plan? Is it the right balance or is it the wrong balance? Is it too much or too little? Have I got anybody? Yeah.
Teachers in the audience, teachers want very much to be a part of the process. This process allows teachers a beginning, but clearly I think everyone has a right to come together as a total community. And even if you do not have a specific representative there, there is nothing to say that you cannot be involved, that you can't be informed, and I think we're going to have to be. And if we don't, we forget what we're all about. This is a beginning. It may not have all the teeth we want, but we have to start. But we have that obligation, each and every one of us, to be involved. Teachers want to be involved. There are precious few of them on that regional committee, but we must stay informed. We in the Connecticut Education Association plan to be informed, and we urge everyone to do the same thing.
How hard are you willing to push? You're speaking to values of information, of process, of involvement. What about end results, the kinds of things that we've heard spoken about by John Britton?
The end result has to be the child, and the end result has to be that we are all going to live together in this world. And we have to begin, and we have to begin with children. But children can't do it alone. Teachers can't do it alone. Parents can't do it alone. Communities can't do it alone. And governments can't do it alone. If we don't do it together, we're not going to do it at all.
Commissioner Ferrandino, I'm confused, if I may speak for the ordinary citizen. What is the balance here between coercing people or pushing people to get somewhere and drawing them through discussion towards an end? How can we be assured that there really is an end result here that we're going to reach that improves Connecticut?
I think it's been that very balance that has been attempted here throughout the legislative process. It's a very difficult balance to attain. My sense is that this differs from previous efforts at voluntary integration planning in that there's a framework around it. There's a timeline that guides local planning, very specific, guides the regional planning process, identifies what needs to emerge out of the regional planning process within a set period of time, and then obviously a process that follows it up as far as approval is concerned. I think where perhaps John begins to differ on this issue is his reluctance to accept the notion that in fact anything of any concrete value will emerge from that kind of a process. I happen to believe that we will get some very significant changes as a result of this process. And I say that based upon experiences that I see already emerging around the state. We have any number of projects and plans already in operation in anticipation of the planning process.
Let me press you just a little bit more concretely. What do you mean when you say any number of projects and plans? Because there's been a charge that it's planning to plan, if I can quote Ms. Horton-Sheff. What exactly do you have in mind, Commissioner?
Well, we have examples already in place around the state. There are half a dozen or so magnet schools that have been formed around these themes of enhancing quality education and providing more diversity within the learning environment. They cropped up out of a response to this need. The possibilities that exist around this theme range from magnet schools to paired schools to student exchanges, teacher exchanges, summer programming. There's a real variety of opportunity here for the public to come together and be creative in finding ways to enhance quality education and create more diversity within the learning environment. I think one of the real benefits of this legislation is the very fact that it is not prescriptive. It doesn't say that you must have magnet schools in every 4 communities in the state. It doesn't say that there must be interdistrict schools. It leaves that wide open. We give some examples of what have been successful in other places in the country, but we don't prescribe that as the remedy.
Let me try to go. I know we've got the president of the Hartford Board of Ed here, Alan Taylor. Alan, do you worry about the invitation to plan and come up with experiments and so on, that it's not going to do enough for your young people in Hartford?
I'm afraid that it's really a distraction. We've got 26,000 kids in our school system. We have 1/2 of those half-dozen magnet projects involving our schools. When they are fully running after years of handcrafting, they will affect maybe 900 to 1,000 of our kids. I think, frankly, that the work that the Commission on Excellence and what I hope the legislature will do next year in revising the way we govern our schools and in revising the way that whole system is structured will have more effect on good education for the majority of kids in Hartford, or could if it comes out right, than this process. I'm afraid that we'll get distracted from looking at what's happening to everybody in the school system, because we're going to be focused on a lot of effort to provide very unique and experimental activities for a few. If we look at those activities as ways of improving everybody's education, because experimentation has to go on, they can be valuable, but they're not the solution. The solution's got to look at what the kids who are in schools and are not going to be affected by the experiments directly are getting.
Now, what I hear you saying, though, Alan Taylor from Hartford, is something a lot like, and I'm not sure you're used to saying, the Greenwich people have been saying. Isn't that right? Isn't he saying pretty much what you would say, was, as I hear, if you're all together, the 3 of you?
Well, absolutely. I think, though, that we all agree with the first selectman of Fairfield that every child in this state ought to get a quality education. The statistic that gets me is that in Bridgeport, the average expenditure is, what, around $3,000, $4,000 a pupil?
So do you know?
6. And in Westport, it's 10. That number is the black and white of it to me. And until you solve that number, you're not going to have a free flow of children back and forth, or of people living who now live in the suburbs going to the city.
Now, you're on the school board in Greenwich,
yeah,
am I right?
Absolutely.
And you're spending a lot more than, let us say, Bridgeport. Am I right?
Absolutely.
Are you willing to share?
That's an interesting question. I think one of the obstacles you'll find in resolving that problem is the method by which we fund education, which is local tax dollars on local property.
Are you willing to give that up?
I think you'll find that the local taxpayers of Greenwich will not want to see their property taxes leave the boundaries of their town. It's the wrong way to fund.
How about
this
you
problem.
as a citizen? I'm going to take you out of your political shoes and ask you to take the hit. Are you willing to share?
Sure, I'll pay more income tax for that if it will go to that, but that's not where it's going.
But you don't want any less in Greenwich money for the students that
I don't
you have.
see why you want to take resources from children. I think what we have to do is give more resources to the kids who've been deprived, and that's the right word for those kids. They are deprived.
And you're not willing to go more than a couple of steps, as I hear you. Does the plan sound better to you, though, as you talk about it, or no? It sounds like you're pretty much in sync with a slow, gradual process.
I think that's right. You need a process that's going to be acceptable to all of the parents and the kids and all of the people who are involved in it, or it just isn't going to work. So a process that people can buy into is right. I don't know that this is going to get us there, but the concept is the right concept.
So you're sounding a little more affirmative than I heard you a minute ago.
Well, I don't think this process is going to get us where we need to be.
Because?
Number one, funding isn't addressed, and that's the equity in the schools that we need to see. And secondly, I think the experimental solutions are only going to have an impact on a small number of kids.
You agree with Alan Taylor.
Absolutely.
It's just too much of a drop in the bucket.
That's exactly right.
What do you think, Senator Sullivan?
I agree to a large extent, and a larger extent than you might think. And I like particularly Alan's comments with respect to the Excellence Commission. This is where the real game is going to be played, and it's a deadly serious game because we're talking about the whole future of the education of the kids of the state of Connecticut. I do think the goal is diversity, but the immediate necessity is addressing the deprivation that's out there, and that is not to use this as an excuse to ignore the needs of the Hartfords and the Bridgeports and the Waterburys of the state of Connecticut, but to have these two work together. We can't plan or even implement on the side in some additional agenda that leaves most of the kids out of the process. That won't work for anybody.
What are you hoping for in the we've brought in now a secondary level of planning, the Excellence Commission. I think our viewers ought to hear a little about that. What are you hoping that Excellence Commission, on which, as I understand it, Commissioner Ferrandino serves, what are you hoping that can bring us?
I guess the
Senator
hope,
Sullivan.
and the jury's still out on this because we don't have a report yet, let alone the implementation of that report. And the hope is that it's a complete top to bottom, or better yet, bottom to top, rethinking of what we're doing for kids in the state of Connecticut in our schools, whether those kids are in West Hartford or Hartford, Westport, or Bridgeport, that we know we're not doing enough for kids generally, no matter where they're going to school. And that's the agenda of that restructuring, reformulation, and to some degree refinancing, although quite frankly I haven't heard a lot of my colleagues, let alone citizens in the state of Connecticut, whether they're from Greenwich or anywhere else, suggesting they're ready to step forward and invest more in education. The burden's on us to show that there's going to be a qualitative impact.
Yeah, I've got one Greenwich voter, though. I've corralled for you, haven't I? Yeah.
I know that Bill Nickerson, and the senator from down there, will be in touch with him soon. The other comment, I think, and where the bridge comes, the bridge here is quality. The bridge here, and the lesson learned is that whatever we do, every child who's impacted by this, affected by this, has to come out a winner. And if every child doesn't come out a winner, this isn't going to work.
Every kid has to come out a winner.
Every kid has to come out a winner.
Susie, let me ask you, from the point of view of Bridgeport, I don't know, you're on the board there, right?
Yes, I am.
Are you a parent too or not?
Yes, I am.
All right, what do you think? What does your child need in the Bridgeport schools for them to work better? If they're, or maybe you feel they're doing fine and they don't need any help from, say, Fairfield or somewhere else, any kind of integrating effort. What's your gut feeling about that?
Well, I'm fortunate. Well, I'm happy. My child is in a magnet school.
Is that a regional magnet or just an in-city magnet?
A local city magnet. And actually, to be honest with you, I think Bridgeport is really well ahead of the game. I'm very proud of what I represent in Bridgeport. We have 3 very successful magnet programs. We have the first regional magnet program, which is going to start next week. And I'm very much a part of that. I'm on the Board of Trustees for that, which is a representation of a group of people from the different towns. And that's an exciting program, and that's, I think, is an example of what we're talking about here. We have regional summer school programs. We have a regional aquaculture program. We have a regional performing arts program. We have a lot of positives going on in Bridgeport, and I think the problem is the perception. I think we perceive things in a negative way, and I think that
about
maybe...
the cities, right? About
yes,
the inner city
about
schools.
the cities, about the students, about who we are. And
if we could just get over that, you think there'd be a lot more chance of sharing?
Yes,
of joining
absolutely.
together. Well, what's some reaction in the audience? Senator Cook, what's your reaction to this? You represent what towns?
I'm from Groton, but before I came to the State Senate, I brought together 10 school boards to form a regional early childhood magnet school in New London. We accepted Commissioner Tarazi's challenge 5 years ago in 1988 about the famous 2 Connecticut report. And I was surprised, frankly, that more parts of the state did not accept that challenge, that when it was thrown out that we must do better for our children. What I'm hearing, and I was pleased to vote for this step forward, but I still have concerns because I've lived it already. We've gone through a difficult process in my part of the state to pull together regional programs to deal with racial isolation. To the extent where my children and I were threatened by the Klan that this was a bad thing to do and you better not mix the races together in schools. You have to know me to know how stubborn I can get, but I was not willing to let that challenge go unanswered. I think what we need to make sure happens in this process, and it addresses both the supporters and the people that don't support this, is that we have to recognize the issue in Connecticut. Education is not quality education if white children never see, feel, touch, know a child of color. Children of color in our cities or elsewhere don't get an equal and a quality education if they are not part of this great multicultural experiment which is the American democracy. The reason I support this process, as slow-moving as I'm frustrated that it is because we must have that statewide dialogue. We must recognize in our suburbs and in our cities that racial isolation is an educational problem, and we've got to cope with it. I share Senator Sullivan's hopes and aspirations because I'm also a member of the Educational Excellence Commission. I think we're going to see a lot more reform from that than single-issue reform on racial isolation.
Now,
But
your neighbor here, it seems like he's very eager to jump in. Do you disagree here?
I absolutely
She's pretty optimistic. She's worked on a real project. She's got kids. She's met the opposition, and she feels she's beating it. What do you think?
I'm climbing out of my skin. I absolutely,
Well,
positively...
tell us about, you represent somebody too, right?
Well, I represent the 7th District.
None of us
towns
know these numbers. What?
North Central Connecticut, Enfield, Somers, Suffield, Windsor, and Windsor Locks.
The country.
To some extent, the suburbs, and my view, and I have to say in surveys that I sent out to folks in my district, I would say 70 to 80% of the respondents just disagree fundamentally with the premise that we have any right or we should have the goal of social engineering. They don't believe that a goal in and of itself should be the intermingling of races. And that's not to say that I believe any of my constituents are racist. They feel that we should, at our root, fundamental to this whole discussion, use a yardstick that says, what do we want from our students when they graduate from our schools? What kind of grades do we want to see? What kind of achievements do we want to see? That's not to say that by mixing the races, you can't enhance some of that education. But it seems to me we're way down the wrong path, that we're trying to see this end as a goal, and that any means we use to get there is justifiable. Another concern that I have, and I'll be very succinct, is regionalization, I think at its heart, dilutes the voice of every constituent I have and every taxpayer in Connecticut. When you have the old-fashioned town board of education, someone can go there and voice a concern, and it is responded to. My question to the panel, if I may, 60% of the local property taxes in most towns go towards local education. If you're talking about regionalization, are you not in fact calling for a change in the entire funding structure for education in the state of Connecticut? And until you address that, are you really just sort of comparing apples and oranges?
John, what do you think? Here you are talking to somebody from what I call out in the country. What's your answer there?
Well, 5 years ago, Commissioner Tarazi, as the senator pointed out, says we maintain 2 Connecticut's. And one way or the other, we're going to have to deal with the fact that Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford have the highest racial impact, Hartford at 93%, have the highest concentration of poor children, Hartford at 63%, and they have the lowest educational performance even set by the state's own educational standards. What is Connecticut going to do about that problem? How are we going to help Alan Taylor and the districts when just the other day, in order to open school today, they cut $550,000 from computers, $630,000 from textbooks, they cut $78,000 in software, they cut $253,000 in maintenance, and they already have a deficient system. What is the state of Connecticut going to do about that isolation?
Well, what do you think? He's saying that Connecticut is abandoning the cities. I take it it's not just a racial matter, it's a matter of wealth, too, that the poor are concentrated in the cities and the wealthier or the easier are outside. What's your answer to that?
But we're not. But when we have this desegregation plan, we're judging people on the color of their skin. Why are we not saying that we will intermingle students from the urban areas with the suburban areas with a blind eye towards color? That's one of my biggest concerns about talking about desegregation and segregation. It's with one eye towards color. Shouldn't we be looking at enhancing educational opportunities for all students with a blind eye towards color? Because I didn't hear that argument on the floor of the Senate.
You want a colorblind reform, if I hear it. What do you think, Commissioner?
Let me respond to that. First of all, I think depicting this as a desegregation plan is really putting it in the wrong context. It's not a desegregation plan at all. The focus of this plan, as Kevin has indicated, is on improving the quality of education for all students in this state. As part of that, to also look at providing a more diverse learning environment. Let me speak to that issue for a moment if I can, because I think that's a critical part of a quality education. I think Mrs. Sheff certainly indicated that in her comments. I believe in that very firmly. I also believe it's a part of the change that's taking place in our society. Now, just a quick anecdote, because I've gone around the state on this, and I've heard many comments, some of the ones we're hearing this evening, in a number of these kinds of forums. Perhaps the one thing that made the most sense to me, I think that really drove home the issue to me, was in a conversation with a CEO from one of our major corporations in the state, who indicated to me that last year they spent over $1 million on diversity training for their managers in their multinational corporations.
Diversity training being how people should get along with one
That's right. And he also told me that he would not spend another penny on diversity training in the future because he will not hire a manager in the future who does not understand diversity and the issues related to it. There's an incentive here, economic if nothing else, to move this agenda forward.
Now let me go back and press you hard, Commissioner Ferrandino. There's a chance that somebody like our neighbor over here is going to interpret you as using words to get around the main point. He's saying that he wants a colorblind plan. I think you're saying to him you cannot accept that. Are you or not?
What I'm saying is that the plan that we're focusing on is quality education. Quality education includes education.
Getting young people together.
Getting them together and focusing and making them knowledgeable of diversity and issues around diversity.
Nancy Wyman, how would you answer that charge?
I believe that the senator is totally incorrect. I believe when we
Very respectful. He must be a fellow legislator or something.
I'm trying to. We have not had this debate because I don't sit in his chamber, but I would like to have the debate with him. I believe the commission is correct. If you look at even the title of the bill, we have talked about quality and diversity in education. We have emphasized not the color of people's skins, but the fact that people should be working together and that locals should be working with other cities and towns to develop a plan to deliver quality education to our kids. And I think that has been our #1 priority in the bill that we wrote.
So I take it the answer is quality requires some integration. You've got to get young people together across lines, racial or poverty lines, wealth lines, or it's not the quality you're seeking. Is that right? What do some of the parents have to say? Are you what's your role in this argument?
Well, I am chairman of the Bloomfield Board of Ed, but I have a daughter at Bloomfield High School. Bloomfield High School probably has the highest percentage of African American students in the state, at 80-some-odd%. And my daughter is very much a minority in that school. It's not a problem for us or for her because she's taught how to get along with people. What I do see in Bloomfield, though, is that a number of folks in town equate black with poor in terms of quality. And we were the only public school to have 2 acceptances to Harvard last year. We have the largest number of college credit courses of any public high school in Connecticut. People in town do not believe it is a quality school. And they look at a lot of folks don't get beyond the race. I think if we are going to deal with the issue of quality, we do have to deal with race. I would say this, however, and I am up to the challenge that's been put before me as a member of my board to solve this problem as best I can. But I've said this for the 10 years I've been on my board. We cannot deal with social problems or fix social problems with academic solutions. We can fix part of the problem in the schools, but the problem of 2 Connecticut's goes way beyond just school. And somehow, I hope this is the beginning of a process that includes town governments. In fact, the legislature is very wise in including first selectmen, mayors, et cetera. I think we're going to have to get into zoning eventually as well, because those folks have to be part of this process if we're going to fix Connecticut. Forget about fixing the schools for a minute. If we're going to fix Connecticut, we need to get to the other parts too.
Paul Knierim, you come from a town where I think zoning is a pretty important and cherished value. At least that's the reputation it has. What's your reaction to that? Quality has got to bring in questions of race.
I don't see that we have any demonstrated correlation between issues of race and issues of quality. I think what the discussion here tonight has shown is that there's somewhat of a dichotomy between those moments when we focus on quality and those when we're talking about race. When we want to talk about quality, we start talking about the Excellence Commission, and we start talking about specific reforms that will help children.
Like what? What would reforms be that you'd support?
A very good example would be school choice as an alternative to the system that we have now. Because school choice, if structured properly, says to the child in the urban school system who can't afford to move to a suburb and who can't afford the tuition at a private school, will provide that student with a way to a better quality school. In that sense, it provides immediacy and a guarantee. It's much more focused on the child that we ought to be concerned about, because I think there's a premise that we all agree on as we sit in this room, and that's that we want quality everywhere, But also we are particularly concerned about substandard conditions in urban schools. And I think we have to be honest about that. We need to put our focus on that. And we ought to be serious about reforms that are quality-oriented and that are going to help those students in particular.
Now,
And
Paul, let me interrupt and just ask you, what for the urban child, the child in a city school, and let us assume, but Susie makes a pretty strong plea that, don't forget, a lot of urban schools are strong schools. But nonetheless, we all recognize, as Alan Taylor and others, and certainly John Britton has said, that there are problems with the urban schools, concentrations of difficulty and problems that are harder than in the typical suburban district. What does a choice plan really, of the kind you're designing in your head or as you speak, represent for the young child in an urban kindergarten or first grade?
Well,
what is the option that you're going to present them with?
The option that we have presented in the legislature and that I hope to pursue again in the future is one that says if you're a child who comes from a school system that by the objective measures is performing poorly, by the mastery test scores and dropout rates and so forth, and a child from an economically disadvantaged background, the state is going to help you find a better quality school. It's also a program that is geared to create financial incentives for suburban and city schools alike to improve quality, because in essence, under choice, every school becomes a magnet school. It has to attract students by the quality of its program, not simply by the jurisdiction that a town or city might confer upon that school. And there's another important aspect of choice as a reform proposal, and that is it empowers parents. Rather than some local and regional planning process that puts more government bureaucracy in place, choice says to the parents that it's a family decision where your child goes to school, and it's not the decision of some governmental entity. It's purely blind to race, but it provides people with access to better quality right away.
Let's try one of the most famous parents. Or maybe we got a couple of parents in here. Are you a parent too?
No, I'm not a parent.
All right, well, let's try Ms. Horton-Sheff. What do you say?
Warm, because I don't think the gentleman is hearing
That's
that,
a studio. That's not.
That's not. I don't know. That quality includes exposure to diversity. I believe exposure to diversity is a part of a holistic approach to education. And I want to know, when you say choice, again, is that a systemic thing? Are you still talking about advantage for a few? If I have a choice of taking my son to a school, maybe the state will help me pay for that. But what about the children who don't have that? And see, I think we have to realize that as this country becomes increasingly more colored, we have a new reality, and we're not preparing ourselves for that reality. We don't educate our masses. The quality of life for all Americans will go down. This is a new day dawning in the 21st century, and we have to be prepared for that. And I want my son to be prepared to live in a world that he can handle, and he can't do that not having exposure to the world.
Barbara Tillman, what do you make of this argument here?
Well, the subject of choice, as was proposed here, takes on two perspectives for me. One, right off the bat, I see we're talking about, in one perspective, choice being the focus that's going to make each school step up and become better. I would say, why don't we make every school better so that every child would have the equal choice, that every choice that every parent makes would come look at a quality school and see what fits their child. The second point I'm thinking about as we have this discussion about choice is the parents. You're talking about parents and families being the decision makers on where they place their child for schooling. I agree that parents do have a say in that, but parents do have to be educated to that choice. They have to know what is out there, and unless we have a large parent advocacy organization within every school district that will work with parents to let them know what their options are, there are certain children and families that may get left out of the circle, and no child should get left out of that circle.
Yes.
I'm glad to see her bring up the topic of parents, because it's something that I think is a missing element that we haven't discussed in this. And I was always taught that public education was a right, but I was also taught at the same time that every right has an equal responsibility. And I think that today we're faced with parents who are not meeting their responsibilities, and color has nothing to do with it. I think that until parents are drawn into the educational process on a greater scale and made to realize that the preparation, that the child, when it's sent to the school, has to be given values has to have self-esteem, self-respect, self-motivation, respect for others. And I think that if the parents don't take on and accept that responsibility, that any effort that we make, whether it be to increase funding or to desegregate, is doomed to failure.
Yeah. John.
I'll give it back, I promise.
No, I don't believe you. All right.
As we talk about choice, as though it is not part of the underpinning of this planning process, I think we're making a mistake. As I read the planning process, it is entirely a voluntary planning process. Voluntary on the part of the people who participate. The trick is to make that planning process so attractive that people will choose to participate in the quality schools that have been developed. This is a program of choice. It's a program of choice within the public schools that will involve both the increase in quality in academics and the quality of the interaction of people that we're going to need.
So you're a supporter of this plan. Now, is it a plan, as I understand you, you're saying there's enough choice in the plan that the commissioner is proposing. Is that right? Okay. What's your reaction to that?
Well, on the whole question of choice, I think when we focus on choice, we are missing the main picture. Choice, I submit, would never be even debated if all of our schools had what they needed right now. CA last year ran a survey last October of school superintendents on the ramifications of less state aid to the schools. Now, these were the superintendents responding. 63% responded, and of those who responded, over half pointed out, one, they had to cut faculty. Some have had to cut administration. Over 50%, way over 50%, had less money to spend on building maintenance and repair.
Okay.
There was a reduction also in money for textbooks, school supplies, equipment, and that type of thing. Now, that's a reality. It isn't just in Hartford and New Haven and Bridgeport. It's also out in the country, too. Later, we had another survey on the age of school buildings, and 900 out of 933 school principals responded. And what we found in that survey was that the poorest kids attend the oldest schools with the least support.
So is your,
that's a reality.
Is your solution just more money?
All I'm saying
I've got to cut you to the chase here.
Quality is this. It's how much money you have determines whether you're going to get a Kmart special or Wedgwood.
Is that true? Is it a matter of money? Susie, I heard it said just a minute ago that your schools spend less than some of the other schools.
You know, Tom, if I may, I know that we're running out of time, and there's something that I feel compelled to say. You know, we're talking about, which has not been said here tonight, is an integration, thank you, of programs, which include bilingual education, and we haven't mentioned that here tonight. I think that's a vital program. In Bridgeport, for example, we have identified 46 languages. Okay, 25% of our students are in a bilingual program. Okay, so we're talking about sensitivity not only to the child, but where that child comes from, and the language that's spoken at home. And 45% of our children in Bridgeport have a language other than English at home. It doesn't mean that they're not proficient in English. It just means that they're exposed to another culture, another language.
Does that fact bring you in any way closer to somebody in Simsbury who might have 95% of the kids with English spoken at home? In other words, are you saying bilingual education simply for the children in Bridgeport whose parents speak other languages, or would you like to see bilingual education much more generally available?
As an integrated program.
You'd like to see it integrated around the state?
Absolutely.
I'm very curious to ask some of the students what their reaction is. How important, one of the themes that's been brought up here most strongly is the theme that we need more bringing together of different kinds of people in school to produce a quality, educated person who can handle this kind of society that we live in. Let me just ask one of the students, what's your reaction to that? How important is that, of bringing together people across racial and class lines?
Unfortunately, I see it as a race issue. I would like to see it as a colorblind issue, but unfortunately, I think everyone in the United States and for most of the world have racial barriers that they need to overcome. I think the real learning in having this program is having the interaction and the communication and learning from students from different backgrounds. And I think that what the senator was saying, he wasn't sure who was going to be the winner. I think every kid will be the winner because he and she will have a chance to have that interaction with kids from different backgrounds.
Okay, thanks very much. Now, let me go back to you, Commissioner Ferrandino. Is there much chance that this program will just lead Connecticut, as John Britton said, to another several years of planning, but no effective improvement in the divisions that separate us?
Well, that remains
How
to be
much risk is there of that?
Well,
for
that
all of
remains
us?
to be seen. There are not sanctions in this legislation. That was done purposely. I think we all come forward with the hope that people of goodwill will address this issue in a timely manner. My sense is, from the activity I've seen, that we are making some good starts on that. In about a year or so, I'll have an answer for you.
You want to, let's say, okay, you've got your hand up. What's your reaction to this?
I've seen this issue rip my own family apart.
Where are you? Where do you
From
live?
Boston originally. I'm from Meriden now and worked in Fairfield County.
So you've seen it from the Boston, Massachusetts, as well as Meriden, Connecticut.
And there it had been a failure, and our relatives that were in the suburbs were very liberal about it, and those who felt that children were at risk were very concerned. What I'd like to ask the panel about has to do with something that I haven't heard raised, and it's what the sociologists called the theory of cultural dominance. And it has to do with people around the world. It's a very human condition where you have haves and have-nots and make the distinction on the basis of either race or ethnic background or religion or something like that. And you have some very, very tough issues that get into tipping points in housing and education and neighborhoods and so forth. I'm interested in what's right, not just by my standards, but reasonable men and women everywhere. What's right, what works, and how do you get them together? And I'm very concerned that whatever plans we come up with take into account this very deep-seated problem of tipping points and the theory of cultural dominance and the percentages that are in effect there. What can we do about that?
What I hear you saying is you do not want to see a program that sounds good on paper, that plans well, but doesn't work well.
Amen. And more than that, I also want not only quality education for all of our children, but a safe environment for that education.
Well, I think the legislation is good in that regard because I dub it a mandatory talk bill. And so I'm like the Madison Avenue executive, and my client is desegregation. Give it publicity, be it good or bad, just spell the name correctly. So I applaud the state of Connecticut for this mandatory legislation in which in every one of these districts, beginning in January of 1994 for another 2 years, they must discuss the subject. The problem I have is that it also allows for a voluntary opt-out for any reason, including no reason whatsoever.
Now, what happens to your case? Your case hangs over Connecticut for a lot of people as a very important item. I take it the senators and the citizens alike feel that that's a really important player, and it's unstated. What do you think is going to happen to your case now?
Well, despite the popular impression that the case went to the judge when the trial ended last March, the judge asked us to file all these written briefs. We just finished last week, and this month of September 1993, the judge is going to call us back for this marathon day-long summary of the argument. He will then begin his deliberations around October the 1st, and most people predict that he will probably issue some decision around next March or early next spring 1994.
Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I want to get some other quick reactions from the audience. What do you think of these plans? Do you have to force them with a court, or can you rely on the goodwill of people talking and planning together?
Well, I'm very skeptical of goodwill of people, so I think
You like to push them around?
we have to, because of past pushes, we have to push people around, and because of other factors, other variables to play into this, not only socioeconomics, ethnicity, we can go on and on with the list. So I'm very skeptical of goodwill.
You think we're going to need a court order? Other thoughts?
I was interested that housing hasn't been as much of a topic as I think it should be. I was at a meeting in Middletown last night where the board was beginning to get this planning underway, and a young parent who was a realtor, incidentally, stood up and said that housing is a problem. And I've heard that for years, and the gentleman talked about people not being able to afford to live in the suburbs. Why can't the suburbs have housing that, you know, for all types of people, is the question that I keep hearing.
So you want to go the next step and not just integrate schools. You'd like to see much more integrated housing in Connecticut. What's your reaction to that? That housing is going to be a bigger issue here than
That's
education?
another issue completely separated. It's going to take quite a while to discuss it and a lot of more programs.
And what's your reaction to the question of push versus just talking and planning?
It's got to be pushed.
You think you're going to need a court order?
Yes, because it's going to take too long.
Jackie, what's your opinion here? You've been a mayor or a first selectman, as we call it in Connecticut.
I think housing, violence in the streets, all those things are very important, and that's one of the reasons some of the people in the suburbs are frightened. Maybe not the way they should be, but we're going to have to find a way to all get together. We promise two people in this world two things. We promise them safe streets, they can walk the streets, and we promise them good education. And we've got to produce on both of those things, and they're very tied in, I think, to the good educational system.
Nice thought. Now, we've only got a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to ask each of the panelists to give us a final word. And here's the question I'd like to put to you. What, in your opinion, is the most important next step for Connecticut on the question of quality education? And let me start with you, Paul.
I think the most important next step is that we struggle to maintain our focus on quality, that we study very carefully the recommendations of the Excellence Commission as they come out, and try to implement some reforms such as reduction in local mandates and an increase in site-based management of schools and incorporating performance-type, business-type standards into our education system, and also that we provide to the children of the state access to the quality immediately, not to wait for all of those reform measures to produce the quality, because we know it can't happen overnight, but we can provide children with immediate access to quality overnight. And secondly, I think it's important that the state avoid distracting from the real issue of quality and not divert resources to a lot of bricks and mortar and a lot of planning that's not going to improve quality a bit.
Barbara Toman.
I think it's very important for us to realize that the steps that we are going through provide a role model. We talked about this being not just an educational process, not just an educational dilemma, that it will go spread throughout our community and all of our social services and all of our neighboring communities. I would think that by regionalizing this discussion, it would go beyond talking about what's good for education, but what's good for our entire community. And then to also think about the fact that we as adults are role modeling how decision-making and how process works for our students.
Nancy Wyman.
I think you're going to see a combination of what's come out of this process plus the Commission on Excellence and their recommendations. But I think what we have to do is also look at the child as a holistic child and try to go and deal with all the problems.
Kevin Sullivan.
I think as we pursue specific goals, we have a very general goal, a next step, and that is persuading the people of the state of Connecticut of two things. One, that every one of us has a stake in every child, wherever that child goes to school and lives, and two, that every child in the state can excel and do better. And surprise, when we ask the public these questions, they don't necessarily agree. We've got that next step right in front of us.
John Britton.
The state must shed its 27 years of inaction and have the courage and the intestinal fortitude to do the right thing, to integrate the schools for quality education on behalf of all children and greater racial balance, particularly for the children in the inner city.
Susie Lafitte.
Well, I think our next step is to roll up our sleeves and go to work. This is my Connecticut, this is your Connecticut, and it's our children that we're talking about. It's our children, and they deserve the best.
Commissioner Ferrandino.
I think the state needs to recognize that they have an opportunity before them, that the Commission on Excellence will provide a series of recommendations in the short term that will address significant changes in the way we conduct public education. We have the opportunity through the local and regional forums in this legislation to begin to address those issues as well. This opportunity is a short-term opportunity. We have an opportunity to do this voluntarily, on our own, people of goodwill coming together and moving this issue. We may not have that opportunity a year hence.
Thank you very much, panel. Thank you, audience. And thank you for joining us on Connecticut Town Meeting. Let me say that the best way, I think, for you to get involved in this issue is to call your local Board of Education and ask to take part in the planning effort and in discussions of it. Here at CPTV, we're very interested in your ideas and reactions to this program. Our next program is on gambling, and we'd like to hear your suggestions of other topics for Connecticut, topics that we should talk about on Connecticut Town Meeting. Write to us, or if as is always or almost always the case, you have a touch-tone phone, I can give you an SNET access number in the Hartford area. It's 725-5050, and in the New Haven area, it's 498-5050. When you get the ring through, you punch in 2424, which identifies this show, and you tell us what your comments and ideas are. Thank you very much.
Be with us for more local news and public affairs Sunday morning at 11:30 here on CPTV. Specials on CPTV are made possible in part by member support and
Derby Savings Bank, introducing their new one-year adjustable rate mortgage. Derby Savings is proud to underwrite CPTV's new 6-part landmark series, A Connecticut Town Meeting.
Mystery and drama programs on CPTV are made possible in part by member support and Gaylord Hospital with its new Richard Jackson Outpatient Rehabilitation Pavilion, providing increased independence and mobility for people with disabilities through such services as the Center for Aquatic Therapy, Easy Street, and driver evaluation. IGA, Independent Grocers Alliance, neighborhood IGA food stores serving local communities and providing convenience, personal service, and a full range of products for over 60 years. IGA is hometown proud.
Lighten up this summer. You're watching New England's Emmy leader, member-supported Connecticut Public Television.
Mystery is made possible by a grant from Mobil Corporation.